thanks so much, Fred, for that wonderful introduction. A bit overdone, but thank you anyway. And thanks to you, Fred, and to the Free Thinking Film Society for having the courage of your convictions to defend free speech in Canada and everywhere. I also want to say thank you, and I express my admiration for Minister Moore, who unfortunately just had to leave, but who was here with us earlier. My admiration for him and for the entire government of Canada that showed everyone how a free society stands up to tyranny. Now, a word about the Clarion Fund, which was the producer for this film. The Clarion Fund is a non-profit organization in the United States, and it is dedicated to producing films, dedicated to issues of national security and defense, but in particular to exposing the particular threat that comes from Islamic Jihad and the spread of Sharia, and here with this film in particular, the threat from the jihadist regime in Tehran. The film then. I hope that it came through in this film that what we were trying to show was the complex totality of the threat that the Iranian regime poses. That it's not just that another nation is breaking through the non-proliferation treaty to acquire a nuclear weapons capability, but rather that it is this regime with all of its jihadist objectives, which are stated in its constitution, its dedication, alliance with a whole host and a range of terrorist organizations and proxies like Al-Qaeda, like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like the Taliban, which it uses to promote its jihadist global ambitions and to spread its revolution and Sharia worldwide. As you saw, President Ahmadinejad saying to spread the revolution to what? To all the mountaintops of the world. So it is that regime in possession of nuclear weapons with that terrorist capability, dedication to jihad and the spread of jihad and Sharia worldwide. And then finally, a regime with the most abominable record of human rights abuses against its own people. Now, you saw just a short sampling of the kind of horrific atrocities that this regime has perpetrated against its own people for 31 years and counting. But think about this. If this is a regime that will do that to its own people and to its own children, what do you think they'll be willing to do to your children, to our children, and to our people? In possession of a nuclear weapon, enabled and empowered by that capability, they would be unstoppable. To think and talk about containment or about deterrence, when we couldn't deter them in the first place from getting a nuclear weapon, but we're going to deter them now once they have it from further action, I think is not reasonable. So basically, I hope that that has come through, that this is the total complexity of this threat that we tried to show you in this film. And then finally, also, I wanted to say that we wanted to show especially, and I hope this came through, that there is a chasm between the Iranian regime and its people. When we talk about the threat emanating from Tehran or from Iran, we are talking about the threat from a regime, not from the people. The people overwhelmingly the Iranian population is very young, as you heard some of the numbers there. And overwhelmingly, according to every survey and polling that has been done recently, it is the most pro-Western and pro-principles of Western democracy, tolerism, and pluralism population in the Middle East. A revolution in Iran would bring to power these young people, this population that is favorable to Western-style democracy, pluralism, tolerance, and so forth, and would get rid of its WMD programs, all of them, chemical, biological, and nuclear, and abjure terrorism as a policy of government. So that distinction, really, I want to emphasize that we are talking about a regime and not the people. We reach out to the people, we support the people of Iran, and hope that they may eventually reach their just aspirations for a representative form of government. So I know that you all probably have a lot of questions, and I don't want to take any more time before we get to them. So at this point, why don't we open it up? There are 2 microphones in the aisles, and I'll let Fred describe to you the process for asking the questions.
Okay, if you want to ask, we have time for a few questions. We've got 2 microphones, 1 in each aisle. We'll take a few questions, and then, of course, once we're finished, we have a reception where you can talk to Clare privately.
Excuse me, I'm legally blind, so I don't think I can make it over to the next
Okay.
one. My question does not deal directly with Iran, but I think it's an important one. I heard on the radio that certain elements of Sharia law have been put into effect in England. Can you tell us if this is true, and if so, can you give us a little awareness of that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Very good question. Yes, in the United Kingdom today, there are more than 80 Islamic courts in operation dispensing Sharia law in Britain. As of 2 years ago, or about 2008, Sharia law in Britain became not only legal, but enforceable by the still existing and parallel system of common law, which is the traditional law in Britain. So Britain effectively is under Sharia law and has been for a couple of years. What this means is that a large percentage of the population in Britain, and I would expect probably specifically women, Muslim women in Britain, are disenfranchised from the common law system that does still function in Britain. So it's a very serious situation, but I'm happy to say that there are organizations, groups, and people in Britain that are now fighting back against this system of Sharia and the spread of Sharia in their society and in their legal system, and we may wish them well. Thank you.
All of us have been watching with great concern what's going on in Egypt, and I saw on a blog somebody commenting about how Obama would not give any support to pro-Western demonstrators in Iran, but he is throwing all sorts of support behind Islamist demonstrators in Egypt. Is there any truth to that?
Unfortunately, there is a distinct difference in the way U.S. official foreign policy treated the uprising of the Iranian people after the fraudulent 2009 presidential elections and the more recent uprising of the Egyptian people against the Mubarak regime. It's hard for me to understand why there is this difference. It seems to me that the people of Iran definitely deserved our support, at least at a minimum, our solid moral support for their uprising as they stood for their liberty and died for their liberty in the streets of Tehran and other cities of Iran. No more so, or no less so, maybe I should say, that the people of Egypt also deserve a representative, just, and democratic system. But a society needs to be ready for democracy, and elections are only the last element of democracy to be put into place after a civil society founded on such building blocks as a free press, free association, holding the government accountable to the people, to the governed by the people. When all of those things are in place, then it's time for elections. The Iranian people have been fighting for a democratic system for more than 100 years. Their constitutional revolution took place in 1906, and that is when they first instituted a parliament, elected a prime minister and other cabinet ministers, and wrote a constitution. So the Iranian people have been fighting for a very, very long time for democracy, and they know exactly what it is and what they want. In Egypt, the situation's a little bit different because many of the opposition, the people in the streets, who justly are looking for liberty and a free society in Egypt to overthrow this dictatorship of the Mubarak regime, have no experience with democracy at all. They have never experienced it. They don't know what it actually means in terms of building a society that is democratic, pluralist, tolerant, and all of that. So, unfortunately as well in Egypt, a large and very influential opposition element is the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a jihadist organization dedicated to jihad and Sharia law. Not just in Egypt, but with a presence in over 80 countries around the world, and right here in Canada, and in my country, the United States. So it's a little bit of a different situation.
Yes?
Hi. First of all, thank you for your beautiful film. I'm a Canadian Iranian myself. I just have a question and a little explanation. Rightly, you said on the film that Iranian people are different with the Iranian regime. I want to emphasize in that immediately after the revolution, maybe 6 months after that, Iranian people started to opposing the regime. But with brutal executions and oppression, and including execution of my own brother, who was a student in university. They suppressed people. But my question is, it seemed that all around the world was marching, was happening, and all those executions and oppressions against women, against political prisoners, and all kinds of tortures that we can't even imagine. The West continued to deal with the Iranian regime, and they followed the appeasement policy. And that enabled them to make these nuclear progress that they have done. My question is, it is not the time to stop that policy and stand firm with Iranian people against the regime?
Yes, absolutely it is time, and that's part of the reason why we made this movie. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Yes, how much influence do you think Iran has with the Muslim Brotherhood, in particular with these uprisings in Egypt, and when Mubarak does leave, how much influence will it have in the next leadership in Egypt?
Really good question. The question is basically what is the relationship between the Shiite regime, the Khomeinist regime in Tehran, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and that uprising we see there. Well, we know that at the macro level, Shiites and Sunnis absolutely do work together. And at the macro level in this world, we have the organization called the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the OIC. This is the head of state membership organization of every Muslim majority country in the world. There are 57 members, 56 states plus the Palestinians makes 57. At this level, they are united against Western-style democracy, tolerance, pluralism, and rule of law under man-made law. And so, not only at that conceptual level is there unity between Shiite Khomeinists and Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, but quite specifically, in this crisis, we have seen Muslim Brotherhood members from Egypt in Tehran on Iranian media broadcasting and expressing their support mutually for one another. We also have top leadership figures of the Tehran regime. The supreme leader, for instance, Ali Khamenei, I don't know if any of you have ever been to his website, he's got one, and it's very conveniently provided in a number of languages, including English. And you can see there, if you go there now, a strong statement of support with a number of different quotations from the Supreme Leader in support of the Muslim Brotherhood specifically. As well, other regime figures like President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the Speaker of the Parliament, Ali Larijani, and others have also spoken specifically in support of the Muslim Brotherhood as the natural successor to the Mubarak regime if and when it should fall. So there is a very close relationship there, yes. They share the same objectives. They share the same objectives to reinstate the caliphate, or imamate, and number two, to install or impose Sharia law upon the entire world, Muslim and non-Muslim alike.
Thanks, Grant. I want to add my gratitude to you, Fred Lidwing, and the Free Banking Society, and to everybody involved in the production of the film, and you, Ms. Lopez. Thank you so much for coming back. I'm sure it's not for our snow. My question extends from some of the comments in the film, namely the comment that perhaps President Obama is the next Neville Chamberlain, the evidence that sanctions apparently are not going to work, and that in the event of additional sanctions, it's the very Iranian people themselves who we want to help, who would be most affected. So if it's too late for sanctions, and if we do want to support the Iranian people of the Green Revolution, who were so horrifically suppressed within a week last year, and we heard in the film that there have been 2,000 executions, so what then is the strategy? Is it carpet bombing? Is it preventing Ahmadinejad from ever speaking at the UN again? What do we now do?
The time is short, and the time is getting shorter for any meaningful action to stop Iran from fielding a deployable nuclear weapon. That is true. And sanctions do take a long time, and they disproportionately affect and harm the people of Iran or whatever country they're aimed at. And there probably is not enough time for sanctions anymore now to have an effect. And in any case, the regime having such a determination to acquire a nuclear weapon capability, sanctions are not likely to have an effect. So what we are left with then is essentially changing the regime. Now, there are different ways to do that, and it doesn't necessarily involve carpet bombing or aerial bombardment of any kind. Number one, what I would say the most important thing for the United States leadership, my own country's leadership, and others in the West to do, is to stand up and make a strong statement of moral support for the Greens movement, which is not destroyed. It has gone underground, it's reorganizing in a number of different ways. It is not dead, it is growing. It is very strong. They are not on the streets because they saw the result of what happens when they go on the streets, but they are still organizing. And they deserve our support. There are a number of things that could be done to support them besides statements of moral support, and those would include things like providing communications capabilities, cell phones, satellite bandwidth for them to get around the restrictions imposed by the Iranian intelligence and security forces. So a number of technical means as well could be provided to them. Things like strike funds could be set up for when, for instance, the transportation workers, the bus drivers go on strike in Tehran, or the bazaris go on strike, that's the merchants. They need a strike fund to sustain them and their families during the strike so that they can survive. There's so many different kinds of methods that can be used to help bring down this regime, but I think the number one method would be to support the Iranian opposition, the Greens movement, the Mujahideen Khalq, and all of the rest. Now, it may well yet even come that more serious methods need to be employed, and we must not remove the military option from the table. But that doesn't mean carpet bombing, even if it is military. There are various ways to strike the facilities or the headquarters of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or of the regime that don't involve massive slaughter of Iranian people. That's the last thing that we should be thinking about. But there are various ways that the regime can be brought down, and that's the only way really to ensure not that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program, but that this regime does not have a nuclear weapons capability.